All right, so let's talk a little bit about wind. So as you can see here, we have some topics for discussion. We just mentioned in our last video the fact that you have to consider the speed of the wind versus your drone speed. I've actually encountered some trouble where I have launched an aircraft, a small UAS, and took it out a fair distance out to the edges of what I would consider VLOS, and was flying it around doing a real estate job, checking some areas, and I wanted to come down kind of low to um, survey the terrain to see if I had actually flown across the property that I was supposed to be shooting, to see if I may not be shooting the proper property. And as I brought the drone down closer to the ground, it lost contact with my control station, and so I had a loss of link. Well, the aircraft did what it was supposed to do, and it realized that there was a loss of link, and it started to raise up to the altitude where it had been predetermined that it would raise to avoid obstructions in its path on the way back. And that's when I realized that I had sent the aircraft out. So outbound, it was going with the wind. And now, as it was coming inbound, coming back to me, um, it was having to travel against the wind. I also noticed on my frozen screen that the last reported battery power was about 33%. And so this meant I had a third of the battery power left. The trouble with an aircraft coming home from a lost link is that it itself is not in any great emergent situation. It doesn't think it's in an emergency, so it's just going to return home at a nice, slow speed. And so at this slow speed that it's trying to return home, minus the wind that was blowing against it, it was going very slow. And so it seemed like quite possibly I was going to run out of battery power before the aircraft got back to me. In this particular instance, I lucked out and the aircraft made it back, but it made for some hairy moments, and that made me think very strongly about considerations of which way the wind's blowing, and how long I'm going to have it out. Anytime the wind's blowing, at least half the speed of your aircraft's ability to fly, so your maximum speed that your drone can go. If the wind is at least half of that, you really want to be considering um, keeping a much larger amount of battery power on board in reserve when you decide to come back. I mean, normally I would bring in a drone on a calm day at about 25% ish, 22 to 25% of battery power. I would think about getting it home and on the ground pretty quick. But on a day when the wind is up reasonably, then I'm going to probably try to get that drone back in somewhere around 40%. So just something to think about there. Differences at altitude. Um, the wind near the ground is being obstructed by things in its way. So it's kind of like friction on the ground. We've got buildings, we've got even grass, trees, anything that's on the surface of the ground that's not aerodynamic is going to slow wind down. So when you get an aircraft up above the tree level, up above the skyline of buildings that you may be close to, you're going to have sometimes as much as 2 to 3 times the wind speed at altitude as you would near the surface. Turbulence. There's a couple of different types of turbulence that you need to be aware of, and one of them is uneven surface heating, and that would be because the surface of the earth has grass or concrete or asphalt or many different makeups of material. And each one of those different types of material gives off heat at a different rate. And of course, as you know, heat rises and forces the air with it to move upward. So as you're going across the ground, as you're going from one of these heat zones into a different heat zone, and you're experiencing heat rising at different speeds, that's of course going to cause some bumpiness near the surface. Then you also have wind shears and different things like that at altitude. So when you're at a higher altitude and the wind is going from one direction, and then as you get to another altitude, it may be shifting to a different direction. That wind, as it's the area where the two winds may be touching and going in different directions, will cause eddies and different currents to flow in there. So sometimes as you are traversing one set of wind directions to another, you'll experience some wind turbulence there as well. Obstructions on the ground, they also create turbulence. So as wind is blowing past buildings and mountains, as you see here in the next piece, it's just like putting a rock in a stream. I know we've all done that at some point in our lives. You put a large rock or a larger rock into a stream, and you watch the water flowing over the top of the rock, and you watch it going around the rock, and you see it making swirls and little, what looks like little tiny tornadoes in the water. Well, you can expect much of the same from the wind coming around buildings and or ground obstructions of any sort. As the wind comes up over the top of them, it pushes down on the opposite side, or maybe it causes a separation from in the wind over the top of an obstruction, and then falls later. But the wind coming around the sides of that obstruction will also come together around the back side of the obstruction, or as we call the leeward side of the obstruction. Where the leeward side is the side that the wind is traveling away from, and the wind then converges and creates all these little miniature tornadoes and things. You may have been in like a downtown area around some buildings and watched a dust devil stir up, and sometimes those are created by wind that's coming around a building. Other times they're created by the same forces that create regular tornadoes, which is a cooler air and a warmer air mixing and kind of chasing each other around in circles. But you can also get that from wind stirring up around a ground obstruction. And then we're going to talk a little bit about air masses and fronts. Air masses are formed when a large body of air sits over a particular location, and that air kind of takes on the essence of that area. So when it comes to temperature and moisture, that's what we're talking about. So if a body of air is sitting over a warm, moist area for a while, that body of air takes on the essence of that area, and then as it moves on or moves forward, it kind of takes that with it. Now, eventually, over time, as an air mass moves, it will take on the essence of the areas that it's moving into. But in the interim, you're dealing with the air as it was from that location. Fronts are caused when these air masses start moving and start bumping into one another. So you have cold fronts and you have warm fronts. And a cold front is when a cold body of air is advancing into a warmer area, And a warm front is when a warmer body of air is advancing into a cooler area. And we're going to talk more about each of those more in depth as we move forward.